Hi, everybody. It's another beautiful day here in Hollywood, Florida. And today I'm going to talk about breeding. Is it important in the Kentucky Derby? Now, I will freely admit I am not a pedigree expert. I have lots of friends who are. I stayed in contact for many years with Dr. Stephen Roman. He created the dosage index. Some of you will remember that. Lori Ross is a friend. She does a great job with pedigree and, in fact, puts out her own Kentucky Derby guide. So check that out. And also Lauren Stitch, formerly of the Daily Racing Form. Now, the topic came about as a result of a comment, well, several comments I received on my last video. And by the way, just a quick aside, I appreciate all the positive comments. I appreciate all the comments in general, but the negative ones really provide me with a lot of amusement. I don't know if I'm just weird that way, but I find it hilarious. I've done a lot of financial writing, and I wrote once about stem cell stocks and how they were overvalued. There was some pending legislation, and so these stocks were just taking off. And to give you an example of how crazy it was, there was a stock with the ticker symbol STEM, STEM, had nothing to do with stem cells, and yet that stock rocketed too. So I was just simply saying in this article that they were overvalued. You'd have thought that I insulted the Pope. I read forum posts talking about how I was in cahoots with Kramer, with Jim Kramer. I don't even know the guy. Another one, Derek Simon is an idiot. That was my favorite. I put that on my damn resume. And then one guy, well, I got lots of emails, and one guy told me that I killed his mother. Now, I don't know how that was possible, but naturally I asked about the service and wanted to attend, but it was just so absurd. So keep the comments coming. I really do find them in many cases amusing. And it's like I said, I really appreciate that people are taking the time to do that. So let's talk a little bit about breeding. Now, my own feeling about this, and by the way, the comments generally pertain to King's Barnes, who I've got to say again, folks, I said that he was an underlay. I think he's got a tremendous amount of talent. I don't want to hear a bunch of we told you so's if King's Barnes wins because I think he can win. But I think he's an underlay, so he's probably not going to get a lot of my money. I might have him on a few saver tickets. I have no idea how I'm going to bet the race right now, so I'll figure it out down the road. But the argument was that his breeding is very similar to Flightline and how Flightline would have destroyed the Kentucky Derby. No argument on the second part. But this idea that because you've got similar breeding makes you a champion makes zero sense. I mean, understand there are a lot of professional athletes that have brothers and sisters. And unless their last name is Manning, they're not all pro players. And of course, the Manning crew, they're not all pro players, although they said Cooper was better than anybody in the family. And I forget what happened to him. He got injured or something like that. Anyway, there's lots of cases of this. There's lots of cases of horses with full brothers and sisters. One is great, maybe two are great, and one or two are not good at all. So it's not something that you can say, definitively that that's going to make you a champion. I have a twin brother, and I would argue that he is the superior twin, and same breeding. So there's a lot of similarities, clearly, and I think you can certainly do that with horses and say, well, this horse, has got this breeding, so I would think that it would be a good router or a good sprinter or whatever. But I've got this program up of the 1972 Kentucky Derby for a reason, or 1973, I take that back, for a reason, because this is the year that Secretariat won. And a quick aside on Secretariat, I've never watched the Disney movie on him because this idea that Secretariat was this long shot that nobody saw coming. In his book, Betting Thoroughbreds, Steve Davidowitz talks about how he saw Secretariat run in his debut and yet all these, great bred horses and all these blue bloods. And here comes Secretariat out of the pack. He was favored. He was favored in every single race he ran. He was no secret. I mean, he won Horse of the Year as a 2-year-old. So there was no question about Secretariat. But there was a question coming into the Derby after he lost the Wood, and people started to wonder a little bit about his pedigree. Can this horse go a mile and a quarter? Because he was out of Bold Ruler, who was generally considered a sprinter. Well, not only could Secretariat run a mile and a quarter, but he may well be the best distance horse, certainly in the U.S., ever. I mean, you look at that Triple Crown run, and there's been nothing like it. And the Belmont, although that track was very, very fast, that might be fodder for another show, but that was an amazing performance. And Secretary threw a lot of questions about his ability to go a distance. And we're going to talk a little bit about that aspect down the road. But I want to start off by being focused on the Kentucky Derby, and I want to start specifically with dosage. Now, the dosage index, and again, I told you I've talked to Stephen Roman. I have great respect for the guy. He's a very bright guy. He's got several patents in chemistry, actually. But I never could understand why he focused strictly on the male side. And that's what he does. And there's another backstory to Stephen Roman that some may know, some may not. Many years ago, there was this dosage plus champion system. And the idea was that you had to have a horse with a dosage index of 4.00 or less, and it had to have been within, I think it was within 10 pounds on the experimental free handicap of the year before. This was a list that was compiled of the best horses in different categories, and they were weighted as though it were a handicap race. Of course, given the state of handicap races in the US, it's really not done anymore, but this was a thing. And this system did extremely well. Well, Steve Roman told me he never came up with that system and he never backed it or advocated for it. That was a guy by the name of Leon Rasmussen who worked for the Daily Racing Form and was friends with Stephen Roman. And he came up with this idea. It became hugely popular and really influenced the breeding industry. And did Steve Roman actively campaign against it and say, no, no, that's not the intent? No, he did not. Now, do I blame him for that? No, because it brought a lot of attention to his work. I totally get it. But understand that. And so the other thing about the dosage index is that was back tested. And so when people look at the results and how great it was doing, it's because they were looking back in history. And I'll tell you, I've done that myself. My Kentucky Derby guide, which is available at databasebetting.com, quick plug there. I have this shit system, which I have so much fun with every year. But that is based on, previous results. I know the results at the time I come up with the method. There are some forward tests in there, and it hasn't done as well. But that's the thing that you have to know about these things is back testing and forward testing are completely different concepts. So the idea of the dosage being this potent factor was never really true. And of course, ratings change too. That's the other thing that's not known or not thought about widely is as certain sires became prominent or less I got a mosquito that's it's trying to attack me here. But as sires became prominent and less prominent, the ratings changed. And so you had several horses that later became, fit the guidelines, but didn't at the time. And I want to show you a quick chart if I can find it here. I always have trouble finding the charts I'm looking for. Well, let's start with this one. This is historically dosage indexes since 1940 to last year. And you'll notice these are all the different data points here. And this is basically the assimilation of the data. And you see that it has been gradually rising. And in another chart that I have, I'm going to go to that one right now. Take a look at this. This is basically looking at that same data, but look at 1940 to 1989. There were 50 winners with a dosage index of less or 4.00 or less. Every single one in that time span. Take a look at 1990 to 2022, a shorter period of time, and we have had 8 Kentucky Derby winners with a dosage index of 4.00 or greater. So not only were there issues with the method, but things have changed. And I can attest to that based on my own pace figures. That's what this chart is. These are the winning Kentucky Derby LSRs. Those are my late speed rations. I talked about this on a previous video. And you'll notice how they have gone down. Now, with the late speed rations, obviously the more positive, the better. And you'll notice about a -4 in 1940, and we're looking at a maybe -5, close to a -6 in 2022. And the same deal here. You got the data points and then the assimilation line. So there is definitely less stress on the ability to get a mile and a quarter. And I want to take this a little further. I'm going to do something that is sure to irritate people because every time I do, it does. And that is I'm going to compare horses to humans. I know. I'm already, I can't wait for the comments on this one. But I think a lot of you have seen, and I think I've actually got a picture up here somewhere that I'm going to show you now. Right here. Yeah. This is from Global Sport Matters. And I forget this guy's name, but he was an offensive lineman for the Arizona Cardinals. Take a look at these two pictures. I had always thought that genetics played a huge part in everything as it relates to sports. And I've learned lately, especially with these offensive linemen, that that is not true. Look, this guy's running in a marathon. That's what that second picture is all about. Look at the difference in frame. I mean, he looks massive. And mind you, most offensive linemen are going to be big guys. They're going to be, 6'4", 6'5", but they're not necessarily naturally going to weigh 300 pounds. You look at a guy like Shaquille O'Neal, he's a naturally big guy, but even in college, you'll notice he was a lot smaller. Of course, we all tend to put on a little weight after college. But here you see a drastic difference. And my point here is that while somebody like this is genetically disposed to be a bigger guy, it doesn't necessarily mean that they can't do other things. So typically, when you look at the frame of a sprinter, you're looking at a more muscled animal, just a stockier type of animal. You look at quarter horses, good example there. Doesn't mean that that horse can't stretch its speed. And recently, that has very much become the case. And to be honest, it probably always was, in that the great sires are typically not the big distance horses. They're those milers. They're those horses that have that quick turn of foot. And so when Secretary won the Kentucky Derby, the breeding aspect just didn't play a major role in that. And I brought up the football player because I wanted to talk about something that I do think plays a major role, and I touched on it yesterday, and that is training. This is the 1976 Belmont Stakes, won by Bold Forbes. And if you want to see a master training job, take a look at Laz Barrera, who, by the way, is more famous for a firm than Bold Forbes. But this was an amazing training job. Bold Forbes, I think, did have distance limitations, but the training for this race was unbelievable. And I wish I had it. I tried to pull up the workouts. I know they exist out there somewhere, but he was working a mile. He was working these long distances. He was taking long gallops. And you'll notice in this race, if you can kind of see the fractions there, they're pretty quick. In fact, the ESR that I computed was a -9. The LSR -8. The -8 is not great, but of course, with a -9 ESR, you're running a lot of horses off their feet. But Bold Forbes is a great example of what training can do as far as getting a distance. And I bring that up because I've got some stats that are even more damning on breeding. And by the way, I do welcome all input from some pedigree experts. Tell me why I'm wrong. This chart shows you the Brisnet pedigree ratings for the Kentucky Derby. And I forget when they first started these ratings. And remember, this is that database from 1997 to 2022, but there are some missing years, 2001, 2006, and 2007. Brisnet just didn't have the data for me. But this shows you the pedigree ratings for the distance of the Kentucky Derby. And it's really, really telling. Notice that from 1 to 105, just 1 in 36 winners. That's a net of 119. By the way, I color code these, but $2 is basically break even for the net, meaning that, if you bet each horse that you would break even. When you get above $2, you got a profit for the set, the entire group, and obviously less than $2, you've got a loss. The IV, I explained that in my last video. This is an impact value. It tells you whether the horse wins at the expected rate. That would be a 1.00 IV. Anything less than 1 is negative. Anything greater than 1 means they win more than expected. Yes, I shouldn't really say negative. They just win less than expected, which is negative. So from 1 to 105, everything fits. We got a 0.3 impact value, net return of $1.19. Not good. Take a look here. When we get to 105 to 110, we get a positive IV, positive net return. 110 to 115, positive IV, positive net return. When we start to get to the really superior figures, greater than 115, look at what happens. Look at that net return. 27 cents on the dollar, a zero point 0.5 impact value. So what this tells you, and this is very, very interesting for those of us who are actually bettors and not just fans of the game. 0.5 impact value is higher than this first set, meaning that they are winning more often. What's happening? They're getting bet more because all the experts who've identified them as having great breeding for the Kentucky Derby. But this is just terrible. And then 120 or greater, so the very highest Brisnet figures, and by the way, I didn't say this, but obviously it was implied in the discussion, the higher the figure, the better. 0 for 13, obviously no net return, no impact value. So I hope this kind of clears things up. If there is a horse that you like, I would not let breeding dissuade you. There have been so many examples of horses that have outrun their breeding, and I showed you a couple just in this video with, Bold, Forbes, and Secretariat. And like I said, Secretariat was probably the greatest distance horse of all time, at least in the United States. So anyway, I hope this helps. Again, I thank you very much for watching the video. I thank you for commenting. Please subscribe. Go to databasebetting.com. I'm going to have some free reports. In fact, for those of you who bought my guide, the workout report will be posted today. And you'll know, obviously, what all those numbers mean. Thanks again for watching. Is there anything else I missed? I don't think so. Share it with your friends. Share it with your neighbors. Make nasty comments, whatever you want to do. Thanks for listening. Hope you all have a great Kentucky Derby day.